Las Vegas, November 14th, 1976. The spotlight burned gold as Elvis Presley paused mid-performance before 20,000 fans. His voice softened, his hand trembled, and then he called Priscilla to the stage. No one knew why. Moments later, a velvet box appeared in his palm, and what followed left the entire arena in tears. Las Vegas Hilton, November 14th, 1976. The ballroom shimmered beneath 1,000 golden bulbs, their glow reflecting off sequined jackets and flashing cameras. 20,000 people had gathered for what was advertised as just another Elvis Presley concert. But anyone who'd been near him that day knew something felt different. His voice coach, Charlie Hodge, said later that Elvis hadn't spoken much before the show. He'd simply held a small velvet box in his hand and stared at it, like it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. When the curtains parted, the crowd erupted. Women screamed, men whistled, but behind the confident grin, Elvis's pulse raced. His jumpsuit, white with gold trim, clung to his skin under the heat of the stage lights. He strummed the first chord of Love Me Tender, yet his mind wasn't on the lyrics. It was on her. Somewhere in that endless sea of faces sat Priscilla Presley, the woman who had once shared his world and his last name. The orchestra swelled. Elvis moved across the stage, smiling, waving, but his gaze searched for her. He found her in the third row, half-shadowed, dressed simply in cream with her hair tied back. Their eyes met for the first time in years. The noise around them faded. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused between one heartbeat and the next. He took a deep breath, missed his cue for half a second, and smiled through it. The crowd laughed, thinking it was part of the charm. But Charlie, watching from the side stage, saw the truth. The king was nervous. Elvis Presley, who had conquered the world, was now a man standing before someone who still held his heart. As he sang, his voice carried both nostalgia and ache. Every lyric of You Gave Me a Mountain felt too close to home. His phrasing softened. His tone cracked once, barely noticeable to anyone except her. And yet she smiled, a small, forgiving smile that seemed to reach across all the lost years. Can love truly fade? The narrator's voice asks softly. Or does it only change shape, waiting to be recognized again? A hush spread as the final note lingered. Then, with a faint glimmer of mischief, Elvis lowered his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his southern drawl breaking through the tension, "I think we got someone mighty special here tonight." The crowd leaned forward, uncertain. The spotlight followed his gaze until it landed on her. The room shifted, half excitement, half disbelief. Whispers rippled through the audience. "Is that her? Priscilla?" Cameras clicked like falling rain. Elvis smiled again, but his eyes softened. "Scylla," he said quietly, more to her than to anyone else. "This one's for you." The first few chords of Always on My Mind began, and the audience fell silent. Each lyric landed heavy. Priscilla's head tilted slightly, and in that fragile stillness, everyone in the room could feel something unspoken passing between them. If you were in his shoes, the narrator wonders, would you dare to reach for the past in front of 20,000 strangers? As the final note echoed, Elvis took a small step forward, sweat glistening under the lights. In his left hand, that velvet box gleamed for the first time. He held it just long enough for the front rows to notice, then closed his fist around it. The crowd had no idea what was coming next. Crowd hush, mic feedback, crackle, single guitar string hum. He wasn't performing anymore. He was confessing. The next moment would blur the line between concert and confession. The song faded, but the air in the Las Vegas Hilton stayed electric, thick with confusion, hope, and curiosity. Elvis stood still under the spotlight, his chest rising with each breath. The crowd waited for the next song, but instead, he looked toward the front row again. His voice, calm but trembling at the edges, carried through the speakers. "Would you come up here, Scylla?" The audience gasped. You could feel the sound ripple through the hall like a sudden gust of wind. Stagehands froze. Charlie Hodge, off to the side, mouthed, Is he serious? But Elvis didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on Priscilla. For a second, she didn't move. The light caught her hair, and the entire room watched to see what she'd do. Then, slowly, she rose from her seat. The applause began softly, then grew, roaring into a standing ovation that shook the walls. Security hesitated, unsure if this was part of the show, but Elvis gave a small nod. "Let her through," he said. Every step Priscilla took toward the stage was deliberate, heavy with years of memories. Fans reached out as she passed, whispering her name. She had once lived behind those curtains, in the world beyond the velvet ropes, and now she was walking back into it. Not as his wife, but as his guest. When she reached the stairs, Elvis extended his hand. For a brief second she hesitated. He smiled, eyes glistening. "Ain't no trap," he said softly enough for only her to hear. "Just music." The crowd melted at that line. Under the bright lights, she looked almost weightless, and yet you could sense the weight between them. The unfinished sentences, the late-night calls, the echoes of what they'd lost. He motioned to the band. The first notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" filled the room, but this time he didn't sing. He just looked at her. The audience sang for him. Tens of thousands of voices carrying the melody, trembling with emotion. "Can forgiveness really live inside a song?" the narrator asks quietly as the music swells. As the final verse approached, Elvis stepped closer. His hand slipped into his pocket. The velvet box glinted once more. Priscilla's expression changed. She knew that box. It wasn't new. It wasn't from tonight. It was the same one he'd once hidden in his dresser drawer at Graceland. The one she'd found years before but never opened. The band slowed to a stop. Elvis turned back to the audience, smiling with the calm of a man who'd made peace with his ghosts. "I've been carrying this around for a long time," he said. "Figured tonight's as good as any to finish the story." The arena went dead silent. "If you had one last chance to say what your heart never could," the narrator asks, "would you take it?" He reached out, took her hand, and whispered something the microphones barely caught. "This ain't a show, darling. This is me." Priscilla's eyes shimmered beneath the lights. The audience leaned forward. Elvis slowly lifted the box, his fingers trembling. He wasn't Elvis the icon anymore. He was just a man, hoping to be forgiven. Inside that velvet box waited the truth that would silence every skeptic in the room. The entire Hilton showroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the air conditioning hum felt distant. Elvis stood inches from Priscilla, the velvet box resting in his palm like a fragile secret. He looked down at it, then back to her, his eyes softening under the light. "I've carried this longer than I should have," he said quietly, his southern drawl heavy with emotion. "It's not a proposal. It's a memory I needed to give back." The crowd didn't cheer, they just watched. You could hear the faint creak of someone shifting in a seat, the quiet gasp of a fan in the front row. Every camera flash painted their faces in white light and shadow. Priscilla blinked through tears she didn't want to shed. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Elvis, what are you doing?" He smiled faintly. "What I should have done a long time ago." He opened the box. Inside, under the glow of the stage lights, was a 3.5-carat heart-shaped diamond ring, its brilliance almost unreal. The same ring he'd chosen for her back in 1967, the one he never had the courage to give when their lives started pulling apart. The audience gasped. Some applauded, others stood in disbelief. Cameras clicked. The moment felt too intimate, too honest, yet too public to look away. Elvis took a breath, his hand shaking. "This isn't about what we lost," he said. "It's about what we still carry." He turned to the audience. "Sometimes love don't die. It just learns to live different. Do you believe that?" the narrator asks gently. "That love, even broken, can still be beautiful." The crowd erupted again, but this time it wasn't wild cheering. It was applause wrapped in compassion. Even the band members, James Burton, Ronnie Tutt, watched in awe. Charlie Hodge, standing just behind the curtains, would later say, "It felt like watching two people forgive each other in real time. Elvis held the ring between his fingers. The diamond caught the light, scattering beams across her face. He smiled, the same crooked smile that had once made millions fall in love with him. "Scylla," he said, "this is just to say thank you for every day you believed in me, even when I didn't." Priscilla covered her mouth. The tears came unstoppable this time. Her hands trembled as he gently placed the ring in her palm. The crowd was silent again. 20,000 people watching something private unfold on the grandest stage imaginable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she looked up, her voice quivering. "You didn't have to do this, Elvis," he nodded. "I know, but maybe I needed to." The ring glittered between them like a promise rediscovered too late. The air grew heavy with emotion, so heavy that even the fans who'd come to dance and shout now wiped their eyes. "What would you do?" the narrator whispers. "If closure came in the form of the person who once broke you?" Elvis stepped back slightly, giving her space. His face glistened with sweat, but he didn't wipe it away. Instead, he took a deep breath and raised the microphone. "Let's give her a hand, folks," he said softly. The applause thundered through the room, shaking the chandeliers. As the sound faded, Elvis turned to the band. "Let's do one more," he said. But even before the music began, he reached forward, gently closing her hand over the box. "Keep it," he whispered. "This time it's yours." She nodded through tears, and something in his expression changed, a quiet relief, as if a decade of guilt had finally been set down. He gave her the ring, but what he really gave her was peace. As she turned to leave the stage, she whispered something that only he could hear, and it changed everything. The arena stayed frozen, locked between applause and disbelief. For a moment, Elvis didn't move. His eyes followed Priscilla's trembling hands as she stared down at the diamond ring, its heart-shaped stone reflecting the very light that had once made him famous. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the amplifiers and the faint breath of the crowd. Then slowly, she looked up at him. Her voice was soft, breaking. "Why now, Elvis?" He exhaled, lowering the mic. "Because I don't want to leave anything unsaid," he murmured. "Not anymore." The audience leaned in, sensing something deeper than spectacle. This wasn't the king of rock and roll. This was just a man stripped bare beneath the lights. The cameras that had been flashing moments ago now hung still. Even the security guards looked away, as though intruding on something sacred. Elvis reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek, a gesture small but seismic. You could almost hear the collective gasp of the crowd. The man who had once filled stadiums with swagger now stood trembling, his hand shaking slightly as it met hers. Can love survive its own ending? The narrator wonders, voice hushed. For the first time in years, she smiled. Small, wistful, unguarded. "You never stopped being kind," she whispered. He smiled back. "Guess I just took a while to remember how." Behind them, the band waited in silence. Then, at a subtle nod, the first soft chords of Unchained Melody began. Elvis turned toward the crowd, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. His voice came out raw, stripped of its polish, haunting, full of everything he couldn't say directly. Each note hung heavy, floating through the Hilton ballroom like a confession set to melody. As he sang, "Time goes by so slowly," as Priscilla pressed the ring to her chest. Tears streamed freely now, reflecting the stage lights like falling glass. "If forgiveness had a sound," the narrator says softly, "it might have sounded like that." By the final verse, the audience was standing. 20,000 people, united not by fame or nostalgia, but by empathy. They weren't watching icons. They were witnessing two people finally letting go. When the last note ended, Elvis lowered his head. The microphone caught his quiet exhale. Then he smiled faintly. "Still beautiful," he whispered. Not to her, not to the crowd, but maybe to the memory itself. The ovation thundered, shaking the rafters. Flashbulbs erupted again. Elvis took a small bow, then turned to Priscilla. He mouthed the words, "Thank you." She wiped her eyes, nodding once before stepping back. For a brief second, it seemed she might say something more. But instead, she reached for his hand, gave it a gentle squeeze, and whispered. No microphone caught it, but those close enough said later they saw him blink hard, his lips tremble and his shoulders relax, as if a lifetime's weight had just lifted. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was redemption. Live under the lights. Whatever she whispered, it changed the way Elvis sang for the rest of the night. The lights dimmed, but the energy inside the Las Vegas Hilton felt otherworldly, like everyone had just witnessed something private they weren't meant to see. Elvis stood motionless at center stage, the microphone still in his hand, Priscilla's whisper still echoing in his mind. Whatever she said, it hit deeper than applause ever could. No one in the audience heard it, but his longtime friend Charlie Hodge, standing in the wings, caught the look on his face. Later, he'd tell a reporter, it was like she'd just told him it was okay to finally rest. Elvis stepped back toward the mic. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in that low, smoky voice, he murmured, You know, sometimes the hardest thing in life ain't loving somebody, it's letting them go the right way. The crowd stayed silent. You could almost hear the air vibrate. It wasn't a line from a song. It was a truth bleeding straight from his chest. Would you have the strength, the narrator asks softly, to say goodbye to the one person who still feels like home? As the band picked up again, Elvis didn't perform. He breathed through each lyric. The stage lights softened to amber, bathing him in gold. His movements slowed, his gaze distant. He was still smiling, but it was a quiet, reflective smile, the kind that hides tears. Priscilla remained near the edge of the stage, her hand still over her heart. She looked up at him not as a legend, but as the man she'd once known, the one who made coffee at 3 a.m., who hummed lullabies to their daughter, who called her little one when he was tired. He sang Separate Ways, a song written years earlier about their breakup. Tonight it sounded different, less about loss, more about peace. Each word trembled with acceptance. Fans wept openly, some holding photos, others whispering prayers. When the song ended, Elvis put the mic down and walked over to Priscilla one last time. The cameras followed, but he ignored them. He reached for her hand again and pressed it gently. You were my home, Scylla, he said, almost inaudible. She smiled through tears. You still are, she whispered back. That was it. No grand finale. No encore introduction. Just two people closing a chapter in front of the world. What if closure isn't silence, the narrator wonders, but a shared breath between two souls who finally understand each other? The audience rose to their feet, but Elvis didn't bow. He simply placed a hand over his heart, nodded toward Priscilla, and stepped back into the light. The orchestra swelled behind him, but the moment had already outshone the music. The king of rock and roll had just shown the world what real humility looked like. The next morning, a single photograph of that ring would hit every newspaper in America, and hearts would break all over again. Morning broke over Las Vegas with a soft gold haze. Outside the Hilton, the sidewalks were littered with last night's confetti, but the world hadn't moved on. Newspapers hit the stands before sunrise, and every front page carried the same image. Elvis Presley holding Priscilla's hand beneath the stage lights, the diamond ring glimmering between them like a captured star. The headline from the Daily Mirror read, Elvis gives ex-wife ring on stage, audience in tears. It was more than gossip. It was a story that pierced through cynicism. Radio hosts replayed the audio from that night, their voices cracking as they described the way the crowd went silent. Across America, fans called in to share what the gesture meant to them. He reminded us that love doesn't have to vanish just because life changes, one caller said. Inside Graceland, a week later, Priscilla sat by a window holding the same ring. The press wanted interviews, but she refused. In her diary, later quoted in a biography, she wrote, He gave me a memory, not jewelry. He gave me a kind of peace I didn't know I needed. Have you ever had a moment, the narrator asks, that rewrote how you remember someone you thought you'd lost forever? Meanwhile, Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was livid. "That wasn't part of the show," he reportedly shouted backstage. But Charlie Hodge defended him. "You can't script love, Colonel," he said. Last night wasn't business, it was healing. Within days, fan letters flooded Graceland, more than 5,000 envelopes arriving by mail. Some included old ticket stubs, others photographs of wedding rings, accompanied by notes like, "Your courage made me call my ex-husband," and "You helped me forgive." Elvis read several of them. His cousin Billy later recalled seeing him smile quietly as he said, "Guess the good Lord still lets me touch people, huh?" But not all attention was kind. Tabloids twisted the story into rumor, speculating reconciliation, remarriage, scandal. Elvis ignored it. He told a friend, "They'll write what they want. All I know is, it was the truth for that one night." Isn't that what we all want? The narrator muses. Just one night where the truth finally feels louder than the noise. Weeks later, the ring appeared again, this time behind glass. Priscilla placed it in her private collection, beside letters and photographs that marked the life they built and the life they lost. To her, it wasn't a trophy. It was a time capsule. When asked years later why she kept it, she simply said, "It wasn't a gift. It was closure." A ring meant for forever had become a monument to letting go. Just months later, that very ring would be photographed again, this time resting quietly on a nightstand in Graceland. After the world lost its king, August 16th, 1977, Memphis, Tennessee. Morning light poured through the windows of Graceland like a quiet hymn. On the bedside table in Elvis's room, surrounded by unopened letters and a half-finished glass of water, lay the heart-shaped diamond ring, the same one he had given Priscilla under the Las Vegas lights just months before. It caught the dawn perfectly. One last shimmer from a life lived in front of the world. News of his passing spread before noon. Across America, radios interrupted broadcasts. People pulled over their cars and cried. In front of Graceland, fans gathered with flowers, candles, and framed photographs. Some whispered prayers. Others sang softly through tears, the same songs he once sang to them. And then someone laid a small silver ring on the gate, an imitation of the one he had given Priscilla. By nightfall, there were hundreds. By the end of the week, over 10,000 fans had left rings, photos, and handwritten letters at the walls of Graceland. A quiet ritual was born. How can love outlive the people who created it? The narrator asks as footage pans across candlelit faces. Priscilla stood quietly behind the mansion gates during the memorial, sunglasses hiding swollen eyes. She hadn't spoken publicly yet. When asked later what she remembered most about that night in Vegas, she said softly, "He looked at me like time didn't exist, like forgiveness was the only thing that mattered." That ring became more than an ornament. It became a symbol. Fans saw it as proof that behind the fame, behind the glitter, there was still a man who knew how to love, even imperfectly. Inside Graceland's meditation garden, a small plaque now reads, "To live in the hearts we leave behind is not to die." People still visit, leaving small tokens, rings, notes, and miniature velvet boxes tied with ribbons. It's said that every morning when sunlight hits that spot, it catches the reflection of something bright, just like that diamond once did. Maybe that's what legacy really is, the narrator reflects. Not what you keep, but what you leave shining behind you. As years passed, interviews, documentaries, and tributes retold that moment on stage, the one where Elvis Presley stopped being a star and became something simpler, purer, more human. A man seeking peace, a man saying thank you the only way he knew how, through music, through gesture, through love. Even today, when fans replay that performance online, many comment the same thing. You can hear his heart in his voice. And if you listen closely, at the very end of that clip, right before the applause swells, you can almost hear it, the faint click of the velvet box closing, and a whispered, "Thank you, Scylla." The king's final encore wasn't a song. It was grace. Love doesn't disappear, it transforms. It softens into memory. ripples into kindness, and becomes the echo that outlives us all. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes love can outlast distance, fame, or time itself. Because sometimes the most powerful goodbyes aren't endings. They're reminders that forgiveness is a form of forever. Watch our next story to discover another moment where music turned heartbreak into hope.